well, why don't we get started then? I appreciate it. Thank you for coming, everyone. This is the special meeting on October 5th of the Housing and Economic Development Committee with just one item on our agenda. But I wanted to first welcome Mark Whitmer, supervisor from the town of Caroline, for some comments. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, great. Thanks, Martha. Thanks, everybody, for your attention to the important issue of broadband. And I will let you know, Dan Klein and I have spoken for a while about this, and we've spoken with Nick, and they're trying to navigate away the best path through this. So I just wanted to share, my perspective today and learn more by attending this meeting. So, and I guess I want to note that I think I think we should continue the Fujitsu study, and my rationale is that I think in a big picture way, a reliable, robust, and affordable broadband service is a key need for our county, as is true throughout most of rural upstate New York. You all know that well. And this has been highlighted by the pandemic. That's got to be the most common feedback that I've gotten from the community over the last year and a half or so. Broadband infrastructure is a key component that's been specifically called out by the American Rescue Plan, and now there are lots of resources from that available. And with attention and resources now clearly focused on our residents' broadband needs, this is the time to take bold action, I think. A system that effectively results in monopolistic service by one or a few internet service providers is really not serving us well. So I endorse the county's commitment to obtaining detailed broadband access information that we need to develop a robust broadband plan for our communities. And I also strongly urge, as I said at the beginning, that the county recommit to continuing the Fujitsu study, middle mile study, because it offers the possibility of a robust long-term solution or understanding other solutions that serves the municipalities and their residents much more effectively than the current system. So I just thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Mark. Appreciate that. We know this is a very difficult problem, and you just have those hills in Caroline. I don't know what to say.
Right.
All right, we do have a resolution, and I guess I would just start us off by asking to get the resolution on the floor. Henry or Shauna?
Yes.
Henry will move. Shauna seconds. Resolution titled Repurposing Funds for a Countywide Physical Survey of Fixed Broadband, document 10415. Nick, you have in our packet a really complete and very helpful memo that kind of outlines, really reviews what we talked about at the last HED meeting and sort of outlines pros and cons. If you want to sort of summarize that, I think it'd be important to get this information on the record.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I can give a summary here. Yeah, this was based on an outline of what was presented at the last HED meeting, as you mentioned, late September, and sort of moves it forward here as following up on the discussion we heard at that meeting. So a bit of the background here. We've been in working with STN and Fujitsu, Southern Tier Network, over the past several months here on the study that was looking at a middle mile broadband solution. So just to clarify what that means, this is not customer facing. This is not something that would be available to individual residents or businesses to hook up to. This is fiber that would be leased by other internet service providers to access other locations. The first part of that study was completed and delivered in June, and it identified roughly, call it 400 households throughout the county that were unserved. And these were spread primarily in the southern portion of the county and Newfield, Danby, and Caroline. and in relatively isolated pockets in those areas, not one big area. There was a very preliminary cost estimate shared in that meeting, which I think caused us to take some pause of what the project was going to be doing and what the real value proposition of it was, that led us to decide to pause the study and explore some other alternatives. One of which was to just engage the existing internet service providers in the area to see their willingness to expand into these unserved areas. And as we found, there was willingness, there's interest in that amongst those groups in doing so, providing that some financial support is provided to do so. So in recognizing that, and that we had to make a decision here regarding the status of both the Fujitsu study and the overall approach to providing broadband, we drafted this memo that looked at the various different options that we saw as the department here looking forward. One of which was, as Mark suggested, is to reboot the STN Fujitsu study. Another of which was to stop that study in order to do a more detailed mapping of where broadband is lacking. One of the big drawbacks of the STN study was that we have a incomplete understanding of the coverage issue due to the approach they used by them of using a FCC provided data, which is, has wide, well-known limitations, we'll say. And the final step of that would be using that data to enter into a more negotiation with the existing ISPs to figure out how to close those gaps and fill in the map with service to all the homes in the county. We also included an approach that was separate as a suggestion for HED to consider, which was looking into municipal broadband as an alternative. Just to, because there have been issues raised regarding things like price and competition, which would not be addressed with either of the other two approaches necessarily. So yeah, following up on that HED meeting last month, we drafted the memo and the resolution based on the feedback we heard in the direction that sounded like the committee wanted to go in, and presented it here for your consideration. So.
Thanks very much, Nick. Appreciate that. Questions or comments from the committee? Hi, Mike. Mike Sigler is with us now. Committee members? Henry.
Yes, thank you for the memo, Nick. If we complete the study, I know with the various deliverables, we'd exactly get what information that we don't have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we'd have a operation and maintenance plan for the proposed network, how to actually build it, and the design basically of what would be included in that, the physical components needed to build out that network, and basically a financing plan of how to move forward with it, using a phasing plan basically to build it out, and the final cost estimate of what it would cost based in for the capital costs. What it does not include is what the cost would be for the ISPs to actually build out last mile service to households and businesses in those areas. We can estimate it based on kind of like known sort of prevailing figures for coverage, what it costs to build out a network per mile, but the study is not going to detail that in great specificity.
So we'll basically have the middle mile priced, but then we still have to get ISPs to do the final hookups.
That's correct.
Which is where we'd be if we did not have the study.
Well, yeah, the only difference is that the only ISPs right now that are interested in these markets are the ones who have networks adjacent to them. Basically, that's the limitation. So you're looking at a limited set of incumbent providers, 3 or 4, depending on where you are, that are sort of the able to provide this. With the middle mile, the difference is that any ISP from anywhere pretty much could lease bandwidth on the STN network and then provide that service to that area. There are other questions about ISP's willingness to do that are sort of outside of the scope of the study.
Okay, thanks for now.
Donna, and then Mike Sigler.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for coming today and explaining these things. I'm really torn on this one because I do think that there's value to finishing the study. And I also think that this is a true priority in our community. I know that there were some kids that went to middle school and high school with my daughters and did not have access to internet. And there's truly an equity issue here. And so I want to tend to think that I would support continuing the study. With that said, there are 4 of us here, and I want to make sure that this gets out of committee. I think this is a decision for 14 people. So I will vote for this resolution to get it out of committee so that we can talk about it this evening.
Thanks, Sean. Mike Sigler.
Hi, Nick. My question is a little more, I don't know if it's simpler or harder, actually. But first, thanks for doing all this work, as I've thanked you before, because I know it's difficult. But the question is, we're getting a lot of emails, and I think there's some confusion out there that we're not, like, if we vote against this study, for example, we're not really voting against the study. It's already on pause. There seems to be some confusion that if we do that one course or another course, we're not committed to broadband in the county, which is frankly just not true. So I want to assuage anybody's fears who's writing us like, oh, broadband is important. Yeah, we get that. You know, the dilemma it seems to be is, I would personally like to know, what is the fastest, how many people do we still need to offer broadband service to, high-speed broadband? How many people in the county? And what is the fastest way for us to get those people connected? And
Yeah.
I guess that's my question for you. Is it to continue this study, or is it to do, listen, we just need to find out who those, I got to assume it's under 1,000. I heard 200, but maybe it's more than that. I don't know. But I guess that's the question I'm asking you.
That's a good question. So in terms of, expediency, just speed of delivery, the approach to which would be to stop the study and to map the underserved areas accurately and then negotiate with the ISPs would be faster than studying middle mile fiber. And I say that because for a couple of reasons. One, studying middle mile fiber will still take several months to complete that study. What we'll be left with at that point is a decision in the order of magnitude of millions of dollars to decide of how to invest and support that. And following that investment will not have added coverage to any households through that effort directly. That said, it could lead to big improvements down the road, and that's certainly something to weigh as a pro and con. That the faster approach may not lead to the same quality of service that you may see through the middle mile. That is a trade-off. However, this is really a matter of approach, I think, as you said, and I think all of the options presented here so far have been with the ultimate goal of getting the entire county served with broadband. So it's a matter of which direction to take, not whether to do it or not do it.
Well, I mean, because speed really is important to me. I think of a parent, right? Their child's not getting any old. It's not getting any younger. It's every year that goes by that they don't have high-speed broadband is a problem and leaves them vulnerable if this pandemic continues, or even if we have another pandemic, they're still going to be unserved. And I think they've waited long enough. So that's why speed for me is part of this equation. So, so I guess that's why that was a question of mine. So, of which way goes faster.
Right. I think the resolution on the that's been presented here is the fastest approach that we're aware of to solving this, to getting the entire county served.
Okay. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Mike. Henry, and then Mark asked to be able to speak too. So go ahead, Henry.
And Nick, there seemed to be some debate about whether the middle mile we're challenging spectrum on it. Can you explain how the middle mile would work and basically the issue of having an ISP already there?
That's a good question, and it's not one that I feel like I'm totally, fully, technically competent in explaining, but I can do my best. The middle mile fiber is think of it like a highway. You need to build an exit off of it to do something with it. So in theory, an ISP who wants to lease fiber up to a point and then go in there and compete with an existing incumbent provider, Spectrum or anybody else, could do so. I mean, it's a free country, and if they're willing to pay that price and take that risk, then they can certainly do that. That said, that there are substantial risks for existing ISPs to go head to head in competition with other established providers. Primarily, that the established provider can basically cut their prices and offer discounts and so forth to keep their customer base and sort of starve out the competition. Especially with a very large company like Spectrum. So I think it's saying that the middle mile would compete with Spectrum is a bit. It opens the option for a company to consider doing that may not have considered to do it in the past, but frankly, I don't think that's going to be a big driver of folks that are in this marketplace. The ISPs are looking for homes that need service or need better service than what they have if they're currently on DSL or satellite or fixed wireless or whatever.
So
Okay.
to follow that up, so we could go through this whole process, taking an enormous amount of staff time, spend money on this study, and even go ahead and spend like potentially all of our 20 million in ARPA money to build out the middle mile, and never know whether any ISPs are going to take us up on the offer, basically.
There's no guarantee, I'll say. There's no. It still requires that final mile service provider to build out to the individual homes, and that's always been the case with this proposition. That said, that there are many ISPs out there that operate and would look at that opportunity and weigh it, pros and cons. So yeah, there's no guarantee.
No guarantee. We don't know if we'd be building a bridge to nowhere. I want to point out that Dan Klein, Henry, and I were part of a sort of subcommittee that met with Nick and Katie and Megan and Fujitsu over the summer, and at which they sort of went through excruciating, I will say, detail on the whole study. And at one point we said, well, so can you give us any kind of ballpark on what it would cost to build out this middle mile? I mean, are we talking 1,000 million, 10 million? They hesitated at 10 million. They were not willing to say, but they certainly gave a strong impression it would be probably more than 10 million to build out the middle mile backbone as has been described. Again, with no guarantee that any ISP would take up the last mile. Mark, go ahead. You're on mute, Mark.
Great, thank you. So I just, the conversation's gone on, and so maybe I'm stating the obvious. I wanted to follow up on Henry's question and concern about we would be under the middle mile program, we would be in the same position with ISPs. But I think the idea of that is, I think, as Nick explained it and Martha spoke of, is that it lowers the bar significantly, and so in that manner, more ISPs can compete in an area. So, and then I understand about that this municipal middle mile project would cost a lot of money in the millions of dollars, but there are grants available, and I understand other counties have gotten large grants to do this. So I do think there are resources available, and Dan and I have spoken about that. And then the final point that I want to comment on is the issue of that was brought up, a concern about, meeting our residents' needs in a timely manner. And I caution against, I have my own, I think we need to be patient and work towards something that provides us a long-term solution. We've been struggling with individual internet service providers here in Caroline for a decade, and it's tooth and nail. And I think so. That's why I'm encouraging at least continuing with the Fujitsu study to see where that takes us. And then the final point I'll make is that I think Katie pointed out the last time that we met that the Fujitsu study was, it's a good deal. So they sort of tacked that on to the study that for the other 8 counties. So I think it is an opportunity. And so that's another point I wanted to make. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, Leslie. Did you want to add anything before I go to Shauna? All right, Leslie's listening. Shauna, go ahead.
Yeah, so I absolutely have no loyalty to Spectrum, just to put that out there. I feel like my service is continuously down. Their customer service is horrible. My neighbor, who's only been a client of theirs for a year and a half, pays about half of what I pay. And once a year, I call their office and I'm put on hold for 4 hours. There's no competition, which means that they don't care. They don't care about our community, but they care about our money. And so if there is a way for us to open the door for competition, I think that would be extremely healthy. With that said, I do have a question for Megan or Nick. Is there any way that we could go along parallel tracks and finish the study as well as allow the other quote unquote study to occur too?
Yeah, we've thought about that a little bit. So there's two sort of issues I think that come up in that regard. One is just a literal bandwidth of our ability to staff all of that. Keeping both efforts going is just not something I think we're able to do internally. And even if we were, I'll say this, they're sort of counter purposes. The map of the unserved areas to be produced, through a physical survey would need to be used relatively quickly to be of much value in some sort of and the best, use that we envision for it is that you'd use it to negotiate basically incentives for ISPs to expand into those areas. If you don't do that, that map will change relatively quickly within a couple of quarters or two, a year. Certainly it will be different and it will have to be done again. So there's sort of a shelf life issue. And the other issue is that they're at counter purposes, because basically if we incentivize an ISP to build out into a certain area, it reduces the need for a middle mile network to provide that solution in that district, in that portion of the county. So it changes the basically architecture of what you're trying to build. You're kind of taking out the business case for that middle mile network by doing both in parallel. So they are distinct paths in that way.
So I think it would be sequential instead of parallel. So if the decision was made to continue the Fujitsu study, we would need to prioritize that, and that would need to come first. And then with that completion, if the decision was made to go ahead with the physical survey, then it would follow that. And that's where we both, in terms of staffing, have one done. It makes sense logically based off of what that study is really about and what Nick is saying about the different purposes, as well as our staffing capacity to do, the study first. And then if the desire was still there to do the physical survey, follow with that if we're not pursuing the middle mile build out at that point.
Thank you.
I'm going to add a couple points here and then go to Henry. In terms of staff time, when we voted this OTR a year ago, it was kind of with the idea that the tourism program was going to be on pause during lockdown, during the slowdown related to COVID, and that, Nick would have the time to do broadband. I don't think anybody expected it to go this long or this deep. And actually, I've sort of been, asked how long is this going to go on? So that's one thing in terms of our staff time. I would also point out that grants are available, it's true, but when we only have a couple hundred homes that are unserved, and frankly, folks, most of the complaints we get are about people whose service is unsatisfactory. It's not about people who are not served at all. We don't compare to other areas. I hear a lot about Madison County getting a great grant. Well, their unserved population compared to their general population, it's almost 11% of their population is not served at all. That's how they get a grant. It's not an unlimited flow of federal money that's going to go to everybody. So I don't know how competitive, even if we have the fullest numbers, I don't know how competitive we ever will be in these federal grants. And then finally, TCOG was adamant just a couple of months ago that the Fujitsu study was not worth the paper it was written on. It wasn't even on any paper. TCOG actually brought to us this idea of point broadband going around door to door and looking at the poles and seeing what the physical infrastructure is. And why didn't we just do that? Because the Fujitsu study was using the census tracts and it wasn't capturing all the unserved homes. And we were wasting money on the Fujitsu study. That's the summary of what we heard from TCOG. So we went ahead, and by the way, in terms of reducing the business case, that was one of my concerns about, Mark, I see your comment, but really we're gonna have to just keep this to committee for now. That was one of my concerns about serving the 180 houses in Newfield, and that if we pulled those out and actually served those homes with the action we took last month, I think then we have fewer homes to offer to the potential new vendors. So, but we did it anyway. We wanted to serve those 180 homes, and I think that was the right thing to do. I think at the end of the day, and this is not going to be, a pleasant thing to hear, but I think the only real way that certain areas of our community are going to get served is when the federal government mandates that providers have to offer it to any home. In the same way that if you build a house anywhere, somewhere up on a hill, the electric utility has to provide electricity to your house by law. I think at some point we will get to that point, and the internet service providers will figure it out because they will have to. But to ask the taxpayers extend fiber to every single home, wherever those homes are, is frankly, I'm afraid, just not realistic. So at any rate, I personally, I think this is a very good option. It's a way to get we hope, a lot of coverage done as quickly as we can. Henry.
Yes, Nick, can you talk about the Southern Tier and their request for funding?
Southern Tier 8, yeah,
Yes.
which is, yeah, so there's currently a grant application in under consideration and review to NTIA, which the acronym, what that means is escaping me, National Telecommunication Information Administration, which includes expanding coverage in multiple counties, including Tompkins, and 213 households in between Newfield, Danby, and Caroline that are included as a part of that proposal. We should, I think, know next month if that is going to be considered for an award. Keeping in touch with Jen Gregory at Southern Tier 8 about that, and we'll tell you as soon as we know.
Also, last question is, I assume the study will also provide us with financing or grant opportunities of how to fund the middle mile.
Sorry, you cut out for the first part of that. Can you restate it?
Will the study provide us with granting opportunities or funding opportunities to do the middle mile?
Yeah, a financial analysis and sort of revenues and expenses is part of the Southern Tier Network Fujitsu study package. So they'd look into what opportunities are out there for expanding. Yeah, what funding sources are out there. It's important to note that there are federal grants for a variety of things within broadband, and that things like the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund and this NTIA grant that we just discussed, those go effectively directly to providers to expand their networks. So there are grants, for things that could expand a middle mile solution. There are also grants that can do, work to cover last mile solutions as well.
Those grants go to the providers, not to the communities?
Typically, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Just one other point. Dan Klein has posted on Facebook sort of rallying cry that people should write to us about that we should keep the study going. And he's written that if we do the physical survey, it's just a map and not a plan. My understanding, Nick, is we have a physical survey done, and then we see what's more reliably than the Fujitsu study. We see what homes really don't have fiber, and then what would we do? What would we do with that information?
Yeah, we would compare it to the proposals we're receiving from the ISPs. So we already have some data from one ISP, mapping out where they want to expand. We're gathering it from the other two that are sort of in this area as well. So we would compare it and see where the gaps are. If we're lucky, then everything the ISPs propose will cover up that entire map in that first pass. And if not, then we'll figure out how we can get those final unserved homes to be a part of their proposal, and what that would mean.
So according to TCAT, this gives us a more reliable map than to use in further negotiations. It's not a map just so we have a map. Okay. Mike Sigler.
Well, I wanted to push back on the idea that there's no plan. I mean, it would seem to me, step one, find out which homes aren't connected. Step two is the plan, connect those homes. I think we're kind of overthinking it. It's kind of like what Nick just said, right? That is the plan, is to connect those homes. I don't know how much that's going to cost, but I'm sure it's going to cost less than starting our own internet company. So, yeah, I would say that don't make something complicated that really isn't in this case.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Are we ready to vote on this? Or is there anything else to add or ask? All right. Okay. Well, then on this resolution, we'll take a vote. Henry?
Yes.
Shauna?
Yes.
Mike Sigler,
Yes.
and I'm a yes, so that's unanimous. And folks, we can expect to have at least this much conversation tonight at the legislature meeting, if not more. So this was just practice. All right, thank you all for joining us, for being here. And I guess there is no other business, and we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thanks, Martha. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks a lot, Nick and Megan.